Welcome to History Flights, your monthly-ish tour through contemporary, historical, and fictional politics with video games. Today, on the sad 573rd anniversary of its fall, on May 29th, 1453, I'm here to introduce one of the most enduring non-American historical special interests for me. The Eastern Roman Empire, aka Romania, with an H before the O, so it's not Romania as in the modern country, language, and people. Human names for places are confusing sometimes, aka Byzantium, aka the Byzantine Empire, aka a lot of things. To get this out of the way early, I will occasionally refer to this medieval form of Rome as Rome or the Roman Empire, because it was the sole legal successor of the classical Roman Empire after the fall of the West, and what I'm deciding is 480 CE. That's a whole other kettle of fish that I'll save for the proper first video of the biggest project I've ever done, which I originally wanted to have done and dusted today, but now plan to release sometime in late July instead, for reasons that will become clear soon. However, most of the time, to avoid confusion, I will refer to it as the Byzantine Empire in this series, even though I know this is a later historiographical invention by Western Europe to discredit it as Roman in the constant scramble for Rome's legacy that started between the not holy, not Roman, not empire and the Eastern Roman Empire in the 800s and continued between the Russians and Ottomans, among others, after the fall of Constantinople. The earliest historical artifact I have about my love of the Byzantine Empire is one page from my sixth grade homework that gives a very fun overview of it. Well, I think the writing was for homework, but I don't entirely remember because my autism compelled me to write these kinds of history entries that mimicked the textbook on the history of the Middle East that I got for fun. Sadly, at least without a more thorough excavation of the boxes of my creative works later, the rest of my entry is lost to history like so much Roman glory, so we may never know what my summary of the rest of Byzantine history was when I was 12. Without further ado, Byzantine Empire from 330 to 1453 AD. Sixth grade homework by D.C. Shepard. About 300 AD, the once mighty Roman Empire was on the verge of collapse. Emperor Diocletian had divided it into Western and Eastern empires to make it easier to rule. Barbarians from Asia were pouring over the borders, and the army was choosing emperors. After Diocletian died, there, Seek, as it is spelled Their for some reason, was a civil war. People took control of different parts of the empire. Then one of these co emperors, Constantine, set out to reunite the empire. He won many victories, and when he conquered Rome at the Battle of Milvian Bridge, he claimed that the Christian god had helped him and became a Christian at his death. He had the Roman capital relocated to Byzantium on the Black Sea, which in 330 was renamed Constantinople. After Constantine's death in 337, the empire was permanently divided. In 476 AD, the Western Empire came to an end and barbarians set up independent kingdoms. But the Eastern or Byzantine Empire survived. It preserved Greek and Roman science and medical records and made beautiful mosaics, some of which can be seen in today's Orthodox churches. Example, in Ravenna, the Byzantine capital of Italy. In 527 AD, Justinian came to the throne. He listened to everyone's ideas, from the richest noble to the poorest peasant. He never gave up on a task until it was finished, and when he made a decision, nobody could change his mind. Justinian led many campaigns against the barbarians. He seized the Ostrogoths of Italy, the Vandals in North Africa, and part of the Visigoth kingdom in Spain. He also built the Hagia Sophia in Constantinople and made the Code of Justinian, which influenced Western law for centuries. Justinian died in 565 AD. Soon, the empire became more Greek in culture. Constantinople held a key position at the crossroads of Europe and Asia, which made it wealthy. However, because of religious differences, it had many enemies. The Patriarch in Constantinople had a disagreement with the Pope in Rome, and the church split into Western Roman Catholic and Eastern Orthodox churches. This is called the Great Schism. The empire declined from there. It lost more territory as it was attacked from all sides. Then the Seljuk Turks swept in from Central Asia, winning the Battle of Manzikert in 1071 and capturing much of Asia Minor. The Byzantine Emperor appealed to the Western Christians for help. However, at the same time, Jerusalem was captured and cut off to Christian pilgrims. Pope Urban II delivered his famous War for the Cross speech, and joined by a Byzantine army from Constantinople, And that's it. That's the last entry. It stops just before the First Crusade, and I couldn't even fit a finished sentence on that last page. However, I've learned a lot more over years of research for this project. And as research for this project, have gained a lot of insight from videos, articles, and posts by all of you wonderful people at our Byzantium, and so can flesh out my old assignment with a new one, explaining why I care about the Byzantine Empire, why its historical impact stretches farther into current day politics than you might realize, and why it exemplifies everything I love about history. I then made a map almost immediately after I got autistically ecstatic from hearing Sinbad in the 2003 animated movie that had just come out talk about heading to Syracuse, which could have been under the control of the Byzantine Empire for the entire movie. So it was a lot of fun to sketch out how the fictional events could have played out in the real world, even if I, of course, knew at the time that it was all just an animated fantasy movie for kids. I'm still kicking myself for leaving the box that was supposed to be blue on the map key blank, though. By the way, if you want to learn about what I called Turkestan as a kid, I visited the embassies of both Uzbekistan and Kazakhstan in this video, and hope you enjoy learning more about those fascinating and culturally vibrant nations. Maybe it was just the audio texture of saying Byzantine Empire from my autism. I also thought John C. Breckenridge was cool to say, but thankfully he was not a durable special interest. Maybe it was the way the map of the Middle East in about 800 in that sixth grade textbook I mentioned earlier and ended up keeping forever looked. Maybe it was playing a fun historical scenario and custom scenarios as Byzantium and Age of Empires 2, or maybe it was that I too often felt beset by outside forces and admired the empire's resilience for nearly a millennium. But the latter half of the Roman Empire is my favorite historical nation. Its determination throughout the final century after the Black Death knocked down Constantinople's status as the world's largest trading center a few pegs, to still stubbornly stick around, to still find a prosperous niche even to the bitter end, to hang on to 1,000 years of freedom after retaking Constantinople from the ashes of the Fourth Crusade of 1204 in 1261, something practically unheard of for any nation at this time, gave this lonely autistic nerd caught in between male and female sides despite realizing I was both and neither at age 30 in 2022 resilience in turn. My love of Byzantium, but also history in general, helped me to survive various tragic sieges in my own life, which left me barely feeling human. It enabled me to laugh in the face of the void the rare times I thought I was a failure beyond hope, because so many people throughout history did not give up, and the Romans were among them. In the end, the few thousand defenders of the Constantinople that remained did not call themselves Greek or Venetian or Genoese or even Roman, but Constantinople, for they fought to the end, arm in arm, not for an empire since there was not much left and its final fall was probably inevitable, but for what they really believed in each other and their city. I think there's something instructive in that historical parallel to the modern day, don't you? I also appreciate that my original version of this comment on the mega thread about the fall of Constantinople motivated this replier. Even though I don't know why her comment didn't show up, I managed to save it here. If you're out there, please know I really appreciate the support. Hell yeah, indeed. Anyway, when Constantinople finally did fall, the city, which was not even the last light of Rome, for the fires of resistance in Mistras and Trebizond still burned until 1461, went down in a blaze of glory, the mighty walls finally crumbling after 10.5 centuries. Then their beloved marble emperor disappeared in life, going down with Rome to be entombed in history. Which is why I wrote a story about Constantine called The Marble Emperor in college a dozen years ago. Why it brought a smile to my face to see his living portrait discovered. Why I am hopeful to see the newly unveiled ruins of Mistras or Istanbul in 2028 as part of my family's planned trip to Greece for the first time in 20 years. There seems to be poetry in Byzantine ruins rising just 5 days before the anniversary of the empire's fall. History is not always lost forever when it's gone, just waiting for people to find it. My love of studying all of history, good, bad, and ugly, is part of why I can now confidently declare that I am a person, clinging on by my fingernails like Constantinople in a world that wants to besiege me for my gender identity, for my disability, for who I choose to love. It's why I have been filled with determination to use my words, far mightier than any cannon, to fight to the bitter end for my city of Washington, D.C., for history, for the Union I swore an oath to as a federal employee for the past 11 years, and for this world that is truly my city as I keep watch on two continents, for myself here and for my fiance and our wonderful son in Africa, who I will fight the entire world for. When all seems lost, you might as well go down in history metal. Like this song called Signal Path from the band Byzantine TV that says when the double headed eagle shoots lasers from its eyes at around 2 minutes in, life is slowly fading black. I found my way, I'm coming back. I also love this stanza. I'm holding on for what seemed like years. The memory's too strong. Death, he bends my ear. Live, he says. I'm coming. Do not fear. You see, this song is brilliant because for years, the speaker, which could easily be interpreted as the Byzantine Empire itself, has been trapped in a state of agonizing suspense, dreading the fallout. When the worst case scenario, death, or in this case, final collapse, finally arrives and speaks, the anxiety vanishes. Because ruin is now a certainty, there is nothing left to fear or hide from. The entity telling them to live is the realization that once the absolute worst happens, the burden of trying to prevent it is finally gone. You are free to live on your terms because you have nothing left to lose. The conclusion of the lyrics shifts from a personal crisis to a broader philosophical statement about human existence and struggle. We all begin to die as soon as we're born. For each sad moment of decay, we rise. There is much death in this life. This text argues that death isn't a single event at the end of a timeline. This song argues that death isn't a single event at the end of a timeline. It is a constant, recurring tax we pay while alive. Every time a major chapter ends, a bridge is burned, or a piece of yourself is compromised to survive, a microdeath occurs. It's almost like the Byzantine Empire itself is realizing that instead of viewing their current ruin as an unnatural tragedy, it is just the natural cycle of life for every historical entity, and 1,000 years of living without a Western Empire by its side is a pretty good run. To rise, something else internally must decay or be abandoned. The last voyage into darkness and the leap represent the terrifying but necessary willingness to plunge into the total unknown, to let the old exhaustive version of your life finally go. This band is starting to get me into metal. Even though I am still getting used to hearing lyrics of the music in this genre, I also recommend their song Justinian Code, and I'm highly encouraging you to check out the original Signal Paths song, which should be at the top of my Substack page for the script, which I'd also love if you subscribe to. There are two sides to every war. It is important for me to note that I also wrote the Marble Emperor from Mehmed II's perspective. For in this age that all too easily condemns anyone who is an enemy, I, who lost my cousin in 9/11 when I was 9, take no side in any conflict but that of peace for all civilians, contrary to the bald faced lies of a certain critic of mine, and cry bitter tears for anyone who dies in war, humanity's oldest and most barbaric institution. The reason I did this is to show that the Ottomans that came after were not barbarians, as so many Europeans have thought over the centuries. After the customary looting period, Mehmed thought of himself as just another Roman emperor, and immediately began restoring Constantinople's splendor, much of which remains today thanks to the efforts of the Republic of Turkey that I can appreciate whenever criticisms I may have of Erdogan's government otherwise, such as the glory of Hagia Sophia and the Column of Constantine. Like both buildings, the city changed over the years, including its name, but it endured as it had since it was a small Bronze Age fishing village named Byzantium. The history of Byzantium, the city before Roman rule, and before it was renamed to Constantinople, is another fascinating era of history I'd love to do a whole history flights on at some point if there's sufficient demand for that. Anyway, the fall of Constantinople is my favorite moment in time, because this is what history is all about for me, preserving the voices of the past by keeping its reminders intact so we can gain knowledge for the future. It's part of why I firmly believe that history is the greatest story ever told. Learning about history helped me feel connected to humanity in a way I often wasn't as an autistic kid. Like I said, the Byzantine Empire showed me what resilience looked like, and now I'm capable of making detailed essays to in turn teach people with entirely by myself, from recording to editing to thumbnailing. If even one new person learns about and gets interested in the Byzantine Empire because of the Empire of Many Lives, and perhaps finds community like I did in this most excellent, knowledgeable, and passionate subreddit for Byzantine nerds in our Byzantium, the way I wish I could have had when I was in high school, then that will be worth all the many sieges I've gone through in my life that have all failed to defeat me. Just as most of the attacks on Constantinople broke like the ocean against the mighty Theodosian walls he built in 395, that Justinian hoped to surpass with the Hagia Sophia, and that were the strongest linchpin linking the Byzantine Empire to the ghost of a unified Roman Empire that stood astride the known world. That's why I've collected 200 videos on Byzantium for this podcast in a playlist you can suggest additions to called Byzantine Themata, and I'm still pre-compiling my bibliography of books, articles, and papers to read. I've learned the hard way that trying to compile the bibliography after you already insert all the links is kind of hard. I'm recording this video in Microsoft Flight Simulator 2024 for Xbox Series X to give you an idea of the geography that benefited and boxed in the Byzantines at various times, with appropriate text and image overlays. For the next episode, The Empire of Many Lives Part 1, How the Byzantines Survived So Long, I'm going to record the Age of Empires 2 Definitive Edition, recreations of the battles of Manzikert in 1071 and Baphaeus in 1302. For the others, I may need a little help in relating exactly what video games related to the Arab conquests and the period of the Great Schism. I'm sure one of my fellow Byzantine nerds knows. My goal for today, though, is to try to relate the Byzantine Empire to key political and historiographical concepts that I hope will educate viewers on the broad outlines of why they should care about this part of Rome, oft forgotten by even the thinkiest Roman Empire fanboys, particularly in the United States, which is facing a systemic decline from the unchallengeable world hegemony I grew up in, and beset by enemies both without and, most crucially, within. I think the staggering amount of research I have yet to do for this project alone would have caused me to delay the full, proper academic thesis from May 29th. Yet there are other new sieges on my mind that have sapped my creative energy to do this amount of work for free, and I'm glad I have this intro to get them off my chest in a way that I hope won't feel too off topic as well as gauge interest, which you can show by liking, subscribing, and hitting the bell. I have chaptered this video painstakingly and by hand if you would like to skip to the next part that directly relates to the Byzantines. However, if you're staying here, you may have heard of the horrific beatings of illegally detained human beings and protesters at Delaney Hall in New Jersey that look like scenes from a medieval dungeon, and the pepper spraying of Andy Kim is positively barbaric. Meanwhile, President Trump is constantly trying to genocide transgender people like me by, say, getting rid of the X option on passports, ordering the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission to not hear appeals on gender identity discrimination cases, and barring gender affirming care from my federal health insurance. Speaking of being a federal employee, I'm very annoyed that Russell Vogt, his sociopathic and illegally acting director of the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, is illegally ordering all of us back into the office in violation of our collective bargaining agreement, while his lapdog Adam Martinez is the hatchet man dressing it up with canned emails. I'm hoping the union will block this shit in its ongoing lawsuit to keep King Orange from firing us all, but I've filed for a ton of reasonable accommodations to gradually transition into being employed more on site. Obviously, a development like this will leave me with less free time to do free history videos, and that means that I'm delaying another video I'd wanted to do on the Soviet Union indefinitely until after the Empire of Many Lives is complete, and will make my monthly History Flights videos that are not related to the Byzantine Empire more opinion based speeches rather than doing a thoroughly researched essay every single month. While I'm not expecting a channel this small to replace my full time job, I'm hoping that as the Empire of Many Lives and History Flights productions grows, maybe I can ask for support somehow, especially if it gets beyond 3 parts. However, that's a lot of effort to set up and manage, and I don't want to seem like I'm grifting, as alleged by my arch nemesis, the modern day Sasanian Iranian Australian cult leader, to my American Byzantine journalist in a war that's felt like it's gone on for 20 years, named Wahid Azal, who ought to have his Substack reported into oblivion for a malicious and sustained campaign of ableist, racist, and transphobic hatred against me. Meanwhile, he charges $80 a week to lecture gullible people on his deluded claims to be the next manifestation of God. I wish I was kidding. I don't normally mock religion, at least religious people, institutions are fair game. But this guy is ridiculous. He already threatened to report me to the fucking IRS for offering video editing lessons for kids. That got shelved anyway for the time being for other reasons, but in part because I had to waste time proactively defending myself from that suit to my prospective client without a full business registration, which he claims as business fraud. So he's determined to perform tortious interference with any economic ventures I tried to perform from HistoryFlights, for which I hope to sue his ass. Maybe a GoFundMe for a lawyer to sue him into oblivion is in order. I'm kidding. I'll probably need to represent myself. That's not even the least of the nonsense brought to bear by this deluded narcissistic cult leader who keeps sending hordes of idiotic Substack posts to besiege the Constantinople of my sanity. My Theodosian walls are still very much holding from the stress of his false and malicious anti stalking claim against journalism on public statements that got dismissed. His irritating use of my legal name after illegally doxing me in December 2025, and constant misgendering and obsession with commenting on and using AI pictures to manipulate my face and genitalia for his sick amusement. And my response posts are spitting Greek fire. It has, however, seriously taken a lot out of me to defend myself near daily for the past 5 months against this lunatic's defamatory accusations that I'm criminal, psychotic, deranged, a Nazi pretending to be queer, racist, a fake tranny, in a fake relationship with my fiance from Eswatini, Africa, and oh, get this, a Mossad agent, an FBI informant, whatever he can think of to try to discredit my fearless reporting on him. All without a single shred of evidence other than hot, smelly methane from his enormous, hairy ass. Not to mention his sloppy, baseless copyright claims against my thumbnails that have dragged on since February and just got dismissed yesterday for the second time. Those who closely follow the intersections of fringe belief systems, online cultic structures, and historical narrative manipulation will find Wahid Azal's recent Substack posts, again, my legal name used for criminal harassment, is not a journalist, to be a textbook case study. When an investigative spotlight is shown on an insular, high control ecosystem, the leader of that ecosystem faces a choice: engage with the documented facts or manufacture an emotional circus to distract the audience. Azal has predictably chosen the circus, because that's all he's known ever since 1996, when I was 4. Well, he thinks he's the next imam, but the Seljuk Turks that poured into Anatolia from Central Asia as pagans and later adopted Islam would be embarrassed by the sloppiness of his strategy. To the outside observer, such as yourself likely coming from our Byzantium and not having seen the nearly dozen videos mentioning this asshat, and or read the literal ton of Substack posts I've had to write, the sheer transparency of this defensive maneuver offers a fascinating look into the anatomy of reputational management by those with grandiose religious claims, now as in the Byzantine era. Azal begins with a pedantic attempt to arbitrate who does and does not qualify as a journalist. This is a standard administrative tantrum frequently thrown by individuals under scrutiny. Journalism is not a badge granted by the subject of an investigation, nor does it require their permission. It is defined by the process of rigorous inquiry, the collection of evidence, and the objective analysis of public interest matters. Demanding formal licenses or dismissing legitimate production entities as merely a desperate attempt is merely a desperate attempt to invalidate documented public domain evidence that cannot otherwise be legally suppressed. The vast majority of Azal's latest article is a tedious multi-bullet point detour into a completely separate internet drama involving an individual named Dale Husband. Azal spends paragraphs copying old emails and playing amateur psychologist regarding this man's blog posts from years ago, which have already been proven not to show pedophilia on Dale's part. The strategy here is a classic logical fallacy, guilt by association by proxy. By trying to force an investigator to answer for the historical misconduct of a completely unrelated internet commentator, Azal attempts to shift the goalposts. He wants his readers to believe that analyzing his current rhetoric is an implicit endorsement of someone else's past bad behavior. I'm not saying that I agree that that's bad behavior, because again, nothing was proven, but it's important to note that I'm just adopting his own framing to dismiss his argument. It is an intellectual shell game designed to make the audience forget that the focus remains entirely on Azal's old conduct. Post culminates in a grand finale of capital W wrath where Azal proclaims he retracts nothing, apologizes for nothing, and bizarrely predicts that I am headed for a psychiatric ward or jail, while insisting he is standing tall.
One other thing there, you're not a journalist. Mm. See, you know, this is a journal. Okay, this is a journal. Okay, this is my journal. I'm writing in my journal. I'm writing in my journal. See, Matt's journal entry. Yeah, that's Matt's journal entry. That doesn't make me a journalist. I'm not going to pull Martin Prince from The Simpsons and go, I wrote in a journal. I'm journaling. I'm a journalist. Just me writing in a journal. That's it. You, on the other hand, are claiming to be a journalist when you're just writing in a journal. You're not a journalist. Really, it's kind of pathetic. You're just wanting to maintain your ego image. Like I said, give it up. Just apologize and walk away.
True confidence speaks plainly and lets verifiable facts do the heavy lifting. Panic, on the other hand, screams in bold font, hurls unsolicited medical diagnoses at detractors, invokes ancient grudges, and wraps a fragile ego in the language of cosmic retribution. Ultimately, every frantic deflection Azal publishes does not disprove the research tracking his behavior, simply providing a real time, fascinating case study in how a fringe figure reacts when objective scrutiny gets a little too bright that should prove insightful even for third parties like yourself who aren't familiar with the whole of our online beef. He isn't dismantling my journalism, but actively providing the raw data for it. He isn't controlling history, but demonstrating how superior I am at analyzing it compared to him. This is because his agenda is to promote himself as some big, tough, invincible godman who can never be wrong, while I embrace the complexities of history, try to contain my opinions to what can be logically inferred from evidence, and yet I'm unafraid to call out bullshit. Still, as I've explained, it's exhausting to balance all that, and I couldn't in good conscience rush out my full thesis in time for the fall of Constantinople. That's part of the problem with our modern world. The expectations for speed and quality of content are ridiculously high, but both cannot be done easily with one person without using AI, which I also refuse to use except for to summarize long texts so I can look at key arguments and reread not only the passage for accuracy, but also absorb the full text later. This is also indisputably useful for translations, unless someone wants to help me translate non English primary source texts, for which I would be forever grateful. Whatever the case, I'm committing to History Flight's production's principles of truth, justice, and historical accuracy as best as I can, while running this channel by myself and pacing it better. I think that truth in this instance means letting history speak for itself wherever possible, and interpreting it only so far as the evidence and my political science know how permit. Justice, correcting misconceptions and hatreds towards any particular group that have spawned from misapprehensions of such, including my firm commitment not to demonize Arabs, Seljuk, or Ottoman Turks, etc. And historical accuracy, well, that's very straightforward. Until it isn't, because it depends on whose history you're talking about, and you do need to cross check sources and not just rely on academic interpretations, though access to primary sources can be difficult with my resources. I'm hoping all you fellow Byzantine history nerds can help me out by helping me refine my hypotheses, as stated below, suggesting books I can use in my research, and being sure to correct me if I get something wrong. And I have been corrected in the past. This happened first when I overconfidently talked about Basil II's reign, after years of seeing him as a badass, including designing a website in Microsoft Front Page 2003 on my laptop showing an alternate history where he literally lived to 100, dying in 1058 having reconquered most of Italy and all the provinces lost during the Arab conquests, making him the new Justinian because I liked the harmless power fantasy, without considering defeats I had forgotten about. I also underestimated the amount and type of aid that Constantinople sent to the First Crusaders. I'm humbled by the collective knowledge on this subject in the subreddit, and am expecting to be humbled further as I go along both by corrections and expansions on my own thoughts, which I hope will keep me grounded as a creator making a passion project for Byzantium and for you all. Currently, I only have plans for 3 more Empire of Many Lives videos, my most ambitious History Flights videos to date, but I will make more on specific subjects based on demand and curiosity alike. As I said, I plan to take my time both to not burn myself out and make sure I can make the best videos that I can that are as accurate as possible and entertaining for all of you. Perhaps I'll only be able to really conclude anything once I finally see Constantinople, New Rome itself, for myself. Maybe with my baby bird and little man as a family, united in an empire of love that will endure for all our lives. The Byzantine and Islamic worlds were crucial to preserving Roman knowledge. This one's not too difficult to explain. After all, despite being labeled Byzantium to attack its claims of legitimacy, the Byzantine Empire was the legal continuation of the Roman Empire and survived for a number of reasons, including multiple academically and economically protective cities in the Middle East and Egypt, away from the climactic decline of agriculture in Western Europe due to the end of the Roman war period, made worse by the end of the dole with the loss of Carthage to the Vandals in 439, more wealth to pay off barbarians with, and less European territory to attack and political instability. Though it had its fair share of civil wars and other blunders during the 4th and 5th centuries, including and most famously the Battle of Adrianople in 378, and even sent barbarians to attack the West on numerous occasions. I won't minimize the role of Catholic monasteries in doing so as well, and I also have to criticize a very deluded Justinian for really destroying Rome the city and what remained of Roman infrastructure during the Gothic War when Odoacer's Kingdom of Italy had actually done a remarkable job, along with the Roman Senate, of improving the state of Italy compared to the last Western emperors. But he also gave us the Hagia Sophia, so I can't complain too much. Meanwhile, books, codes of laws, art, and architecture, among other things, were all preserved, transmitted to the Islamic world to build on in the Islamic Golden Age after the Arab conquests, improved upon, such as with the invention of Greek fire, and eventually transmitted back to the West with the flight of Byzantine scholars from Constantinople in 1453 that sowed the seeds for the Renaissance. Byzantine conflicts with Islam shaped Europe's relationship to the East. This one is a little knottier as it touches on contemporary politics to some degree. When the Arab conquests took place in the 7th century, Byzantium's continued resistance helped provide a buffer along with the Franks and Asturias against the Islamic expansion in Europe until the Ottomans finally breached Thrace in the early 1300s. Not making a judgment about whether Europe would be better or worse, but it certainly would have been different to today. Before that, of course, there was the Battle of Manskert, probably one of the most important battles in world history because the defeat and resultant appeals from Emperor Alexios I Komnenos led to the Crusades and began a long-standing European interest in interventionism and colonialism, including that backfiring on the Byzantines in the Fourth Crusade, while also being crucial in the development of Orientalism. I will also contend that Arab intermarriage with remaining Canaanites after the conquests was the beginning of the Palestinians as we know them, which, due to them both being descended from Canaanite groups, I assert, means that both Jews and Arab Palestinians have valid claims to nativity in the Levant, and that this would have happened far more slowly if Byzantium and the Sassanids had not fought each other to a draw. The Byzantines also helped shape the East West European conflict. Basil too helped persuade Vladimir the Great, poor Anna Porphyrogenita, I hope I'm not butchering that. I hate that his own sister was a bargaining chip in this, to convert to Christianity in 988 after abortive efforts by Patriarch Photius in 867, and then the rest of Rus swiftly followed. After that, all the Eastern Slavic principalities in what would eventually become Russia followed the Orthodox Church in the East West or Great Schism of 1054. No one can understand Russia's national identity in opposition to the West through the centuries without understanding this, just as they cannot understand Russia's deep anxiety for territorial security, such as the genocidal invasion of Ukraine, without the Mongol conquests and the invasions of Napoleon and Hitler. Constantinople's strategic and vulnerable location. Constantinople was one of the most crucial cities for trade between Europe and the Far East, quote unquote. So its fall to the Ottomans was one of the push factors for the search for a western route to India, including, unfortunately, the discovery of the New World. That, as we know, was not even the first contact by Europeans with Native Americans. The Vikings did that first. But also, both the plague of Justinian and the Black Death that were fostered in Constantinople first and then spread all over by trade had massive demographic, economic, and political consequences for Europe, including the start of terminal decline for the empire, along with the start of the Little Ice Age in the 1300s. I look forward to your feedback and to presenting a project that can help illuminate the Byzantine Empire's place in history. Because history never repeats, but it does rhyme. For unfortunately, I have already drawn the parallel of an extended empire, and this feels all too relevant to the war the United States is fighting with Iran. As I explained in History Flights number 8, The Dumb Road Doctrine, and History Flights number 9, America's Dangerous President Worship, the United States may have an imperial army stationed all over the world, but even the mightiest empires cannot hope to overcome logistical hurdles forever if too spread out, versus an opponent with fortified choke points such as the Strait of Hormuz. So it was for Rome's implacable foe, the Parthian and later Sasanian empires of Persia. For while Rome could often successfully jockey for influence over the kingdom of Armenia, and even conquered Mesopotamia in 117 CE, I'll go over both more in future videos. It could never truly beat Persia thanks to the Zagros Mountains. That meant that both were left vulnerable to the Arab conquests from exhaustion, and that fundamentally changed the history of West Asia forever. Please note that again, despite my own personal criticisms of Muhammad's alleged behavior, as well as the precepts of Islam and other primarily Abrahamic religions, as theological concepts and as tools of authoritarianism in other videos, I will not be doing so here. Therefore, it is not for me to judge whether history would have been better or worse, because history is not usually so neatly divided into good guys and bad guys, except with a heavy dose of presentism that I will try to avoid. Speaking of the historical past, I will conclude by reading my college story, The Marble Emperor, into the historical record. May 28th, 1453. Byzantine Emperor Constantine XI Dragas Paleologos knelt on the cold marble floor of the Hagia Sophia, the church at the center of Constantinople, with his head bowed and his eyes closed in prayer. To surrender the city to you is beyond my authority or anyone else's who lives in it, for all of us, after taking the mutual decision, shall die out of free will without sparing our lives, he had growled as he threw the Turkish delegation out. His father Manuel, too, his mother Helena, and his older brother John VIII had prepared Constantine his entire life for the possibility that the Ottomans would one day try to destroy the empire. If they were here, they would know what to do, he thought solemnly. Their stories of the centuries of Muslim atrocities against Christians horrified him as a child, and he suffered a bitter military loss when the Turks drove his armies from an attempted conquest of Athens back to Corinth in 1446. Therefore, from the moment he took the throne in 1449, he undertook to strengthen the city and spill their blood fighting for it. But now, those very words of defiance came back to bite him like vipers that now hissed with the accusation. What empire is there left to destroy? What empire indeed? The Byzantines were the Eastern Greek speaking descendants of the Roman Empire, which once had uncontested dominion from Britain to Persia. After 10 centuries of weathering attacks from barbarians, Muslims, and Christians alike, however, the Byzantines now only ruled a small portion of the southernmost part of Greece called the Despotate of the Morea, astride what used to be Sparta, a handful of Aegean islands, and the immediate environs of Constantinople. And yet, Constantine reflected, he was not truly alone in this fight. Kneeling in prayer beside him was Giovanni Giustiniani. Constantine had joked to Giovanni during a rare break in the siege that he was the only good man to ever come out of Genoa. But it was true. The Italian had sailed to Constantinople's aid with 700 Genoese mercenaries. But far more importantly, he quickly became Constantine's protostrator, or second in command, and made sure the ragtag Byzantine, Genoese, and Venetian soldiers remained unified and could effectively defend the walls. Without his help, the city would not have held out for as long as it had so far. Right now, though, Giovanni looked worried as he turned to Constantine. Constantine did his best to not show the fear that this look caused to spread through his whole body. If Giovanni was nervous, then surely something must be wrong. But Constantine dared not show his trepidation. He certainly could not afford to appear weak in front of the throng of thousands of civilian refugees who had been praying with them. They now took shelter in the center of this cathedral that remained strong for them, and that housed the priests who fed them with meager stores of bread, even as paint from the mosaics peeled off and the critical masonry in the walls started to show cracks and strain. It seemed to the Emperor that his subjects were also barely holding themselves together, especially recently. On the night of May 22nd, when the moon rose, it was partially eclipsed by the Earth's shadow, and its light glowed red like blood. This already caused enough panic for Constantine and what remained of his government in a city that had been besieged for a month to have to deal with. To make things worse, rumors flew around that there was a prophecy that the city would fall after a blood moon. Then, 4 days later, the entire city was blanketed by a large, thick, and choking cloud of black fog. When the fog lifted, there appeared around the dome of the Hagia Sophia a strange multicolored light, which some hoped came from the fires of foreign armies come to relieve the city. Most, however, despaired, wailing throughout the crumbling streets that the Holy Spirit had abandoned the capital to the heathens. Under these circumstances, Constantine could not blame anyone for panicking. He almost envied that they were able to scream. Is there something that troubles you, my friend? He asked calmly, placing a large, weary hand on the Italian captain's shoulder. I don't know how to, I don't know quite how to say this, my lord. Please, we have known each other long enough, Giovanni. It is Constantine. All right, Constantine, Giovanni stammered quietly, hoping that he wasn't disturbing the Latin and Greek churchmen and the imperial nobility who sat immediately behind him as the service continued. I am afraid I must beg leave to attend to the walls. It appears that the Turks are concentrating their cannon fire on the Blackernai. These were the most weakened walls and were situated in the northwest of the city. I will excuse you and ask for God's forgiveness on your behalf if he should be offended by this, Constantine nodded. As Giovanni attempted to slink towards the exit without arousing the panic of the commoners or the offended huffs of the churchmen, Constantine wished that he could leave. He was, of course, a very devout Christian, and it was important that the emperor remain implacably, solemnly beseeching of God's mercy at a time like this. But now he could very well feel the weight of the sword on his right hip and the shield leaning on his left arm, and he knew they would both soon be needed. Rumili Hisari, Ottoman fortress just north of Constantinople. Are you sure that it will not break this time? Sultan Mehmed shouted at Orban. He did this not out of any anger towards the other man, but simply in order for his words to be heard over the constant gunfire. Yes, my lord, Orban bowed. I have made several small but important improvements to the design since the last time we fired it. Excellent, my friend, Mehmed replied. However, the Sultan made a careful mental note to keep an eye on Orban. He had initially offered to work for the Byzantines. It was only because his asking price was too high and because the Byzantines did not have the resources necessary for what he was asking to create for them that he had changed sides, and that would pose a problem. Orban's blond mustache trembled before he said, I have the full team of 60 oxen and 400 men rolling into position in front of the fort even as we speak. Good, Mehmed smiled, something which Orban had rarely seen. Orban then enthusiastically cried, I will go down there and personally make sure that it is aimed and fired properly. Where would you like me to aim it? See how the other cannons are concentrating their fire at the northwest corner? Mehmed asked and then pointed. Orban nodded and immediately rushed down and made preparations to fire upon the Blackernai. At whatever price his loyalty may have been bought to start with that gesture, Mehmed was now confident that Orban would remain on his side. When he came to the throne 2 years earlier after the death of his father, Sultan Murad II, no one would have ever thought that Mehmed, then only 19, would ever inspire any kind of loyalty or do anything great. Even Mehmed himself had not been confident in himself when he took the throne. He had done it before, ruling for a short time when his father abdicated in 1444, but he was only 12 at the time. Frustrated when his teachers assumed he could not do anything competently, took power out from under him, and then nearly ran the entire nation into the ground, Mehmed had had to supplicate his father to return to the throne and resented being lectured by the old fool afterwards. Thereafter, father and son bitterly resented each other. Mehmed had not wanted to have to go through it all again, and almost cursed Allah for taking his father away and making him do this. But as his father lay dying in 1451, he had summoned young Mehmed into his chambers and had him sit beside him on the bed and read from one of the hadiths, a report of the deeds and sayings of the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him. In it he said, Verily you shall conquer Constantinople. What a wonderful leader will he be, and what a wonderful army will that army be. I know that you can do what I could not, my son. Sultan Murad coughed, and then closed his eyes and drifted into paradise. His teacher Akhemsedin had drilled into him from the moment he could read that it was his Islamic duty to capture Constantinople. And now, as he wept for the loss of his father, Mehmed was reminded of that. He knew what his first act in office must be, and knew that the Christian and Muslim enemies that surrounded him would never take him seriously unless he did this. Therefore, from the moment he had taken the throne, Mehmed prepared his armies to crush Constantinople. In doing so, he would succeed where Muslim armies had failed since 678. In the process, he would eliminate a small but annoying foe in the middle of his country, establish for it a natural capital, and turn his sultanate into an heir to the glory of Rome herself. Of course, since he was a reasonable man, he had first offered a way for Byzantine Emperor Constantine to step down without bloodshed. He didn't expect Constantine would agree, but all this blood was now on the Greek. Fire! The Sultan cried once Orban had positioned the cannon correctly. It was now midnight on the morning of May 29th, and the Sultan now prayed that this would mark the final assault that would deliver the city to himself, his people, and to Allah. No sooner had the fuse been lit than the hiss and pop of the fire dancing on the edges of the rope that fed itself into the monstrous bronze beast echoed within its cavernous belly. To some who were on the ground, it was almost as if this cannon, which was heavier than several ships put together, was an unholy jinn taking a deep inhalation before breathing out terrible fire upon its enemies. And when it belched its black smoke, wheels taller than two men standing on top of one another nearly buckled from the recoil as the ball sailed across the Golden Horn, the small inlet that formed the northern boundary of Constantinople. Several soldiers immediately noticed another loud bang emerge from the metal dragon, but none of them remembered loading and firing it at all, which seemed odd. One went to take a closer look. By the time he heard another angry shout emerging from the cracks, however, an enraged fireball devoured him and spat out only ash in its wake. The frightened rabbits ran for their lives, but it was already too late. Mehmed could not bear to watch the carnage below him. When the bloated weapon finally shuddered and died, he despaired to learn that what was left of Orban had been incinerated in the blast and crushed by falling pieces of bronze as well. Struggling to keep away tears so as not to panic those men who still lived and were dealing with the horror of seeing their mangled comrades, the Sultan's eyes followed the cannonball for a moment before he knelt on the fortress's walls and made this solemn prayer. Allah, if it be your will, bring Orban into paradise and let his death not have been in vain. Bless our endeavor this night and deliver Constantinople unto us. What will you have me do, my lord? The commander of the Janissaries, the Empire's brave elite soldiers, asked the Sultan. Assemble every man you have and prepare to attack! All of you, get away from the walls and take cover! Giovanni cried. He was at the front of the line, waving with his sword and banging his shield to get the attention of those who were still manning the Blackernai guard posts at that moment. Most saw his message and tried to escape by leaping away from the towers and onto the piles of hay below. That did not work at all, but fortunately, when compared to those who were caught on the walls when the cannonball slammed into them, their deaths were swift and painless. Giovanni squinted as his entire body and his suit of armor was coated in a thin layer of powdered limestone from the hole that had been punched through the city's defenses. And worse, mere moments seemed to pass before a horde of howling Turks streamed through the walls, seemingly endless. And not just any Turks. Janissaries. Brutal, merciless, and born only to kill and maim, these monstrous, gnarled mercenaries drove fear into the hearts of the defenders. Stand your ground! Giovanni yelled, for we will fight and die honorably and on our feet, as our Roman forefathers did before us. He did not get to say much more before a river of Turkish shields slammed against his own. The Italian leaned his shoulder into his shield to push back against them and stabbed his foes through whatever hole in their guard he could find, coating the cobblestones generously with their blood. Just as Giovanni was about to say something further to rally the defenders to push the Turks back towards the breach in the wall, a crossbow bolt lodged itself in his throat and stifled the Emperor's friend forever. And as word of Giovanni's death spread around the ranks, the Byzantines and their foreign allies broke ranks and retreated now that the man who had single-handedly kept the empire together was gone. Why are they retreating? Emperor Constantine asked to himself with his hands folded behind his long purple robes, even though he already knew what the answer was. I do not know, my lord, one of the churchmen said. The Turks are pouring into the city like a river, a man who used to be a merchant yelled. We're doomed! I just saw two priests disappear into the cathedral walls. God is punishing us up for our sins, a woman sobbed. But then, even though Constantine was coming apart at the moment he knew the city was lost, the emperor walked calmly through the teeming masses and said, "My friends, fellow Romans, do not despair. For whatever happens this night, trust in our Lord and Savior, for he has said to us, 'Blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven.'" With that, Constantine commanded the guards still inside to bolt the doors to the Hagia Sophia, quickly picked up his sword and shield, and ran through the city in full armor, fueled by adrenaline to meet with his men before they could completely retreat. His robes were long and cumbersome, and the trappings of what little of his imperial office he had left now only served to slow him down. With that, he cried at the top of his lungs, "The city has fallen, and I am still alive!" Tore them off so as to no longer distinguish himself from his soldiers, and charged into the fray with them. After that, no one saw Constantine again. Some say, even to this day, that just at the moment of his death, an angel flew in and carried the beloved last emperor of Rome away. Others say he left the battle, stood atop a platform overlooking the carnage, and wept before hanging himself. From that moment on, he became the marble emperor, turned to stone and entombed underneath the city until he would awaken again in its hour of need. Simultaneously, legends grew that the two priests who disappeared into the walls of Hagia Sophia would reemerge when the city would be retaken by the soldiers of Christ. The great oak doors to the Hagia Sophia now leaned slackly against the rotting pillars of stone as the Sultan entered the passageway. It had only been 3 days since the Ottomans captured Constantinople, and already his workers were busy painting over the mosaics of Mary with Child, with beautiful white Arabic lettering on top of a simple black background, as well as placing minarets at the tops of the towers. Within a month, his planners told him, the mosque would be renovated enough to allow for Friday prayers to be read. Mehmed's soldiers had also been hard at work looting over the past 3 days, an enterprise that personally disgusted the young ruler. But this had to be allowed, if only for this limited amount of time. For soldiers on any side of a war these days were often a fickle bunch, prone to deserting if every little demand of theirs was not met. For instance, he had had to build Rumeli Hisari in the shape of the Arabic letters for Muhammad in order to keep morale up, and that had only lasted a week. It hadn't hurt, however, that his name was styled the same way. The results of the 3 day looting period were almost too much for him to gaze upon. Elderly men who just days earlier had been praying for deliverance from the prophet Isa, who they called Jesus, were now stacked on wagons and preparing to be dumped into the Bosphorus. Children were in shackles, about to be sold to slave markets as far as the Songhai in the heart of Africa. And women and young girls were weeping, their clothes in tatters. He could do nothing about those whose freedom had already been lost, but now his voice boomed through the mosque. "Henceforth, those who are still in hiding will not be harmed." Hopefully, he thought this would be the first step in beginning to rebuild the city to its former glory. Soon, he reasoned, it would become the glorious shimmering golden crown of an empire without end. It would welcome commerce from all over the world, shelter Muslim, Christian, and Jew, and become the greatest power the world had ever known. The spider weaves the curtains in the palace of the Caesars, and the owl calls the watches in the tower of Afrasiab. Mehmed had proclaimed when he first stepped into the city. Hopefully, that would not be the case for much longer. Once I finished writing my fictional The Wind Empress steampunk fantasy series, I definitely want to tackle this story again. The through line for a potential novel, tentatively titled Despowina, that I discovered recently, is that the Marvel Emperor can serve as a nice prologue to the life of Sophia Paleologina, Constantine's niece and grandmother of Russian Tsar Ivan IV the Terrible. Imagine living peacefully in the relatively calm Morea until your uncle gets murdered at age 4, then your home gets sacked, and you have to leave with your family to Italy before moving to Russia to get married. That's a different story for a different time on the Empire of Many Lives. For now, I hope you rest easier having learned some history.